The world is full of interesting people with wisdom and extraordinary experiences to learn from. Join me on a journey to discover them, speak with them, and learn from them. I'm Adrian Sinclair, host of A Podcast with Interesting People at apodcast.com. This is A Podcast with Interesting People. Today we have a book author, a poet from New Hampshire, Mr. Kent McKenzie, and we're going to be talking about his latest published book, Where It All Went South, a book 3 in the Compass Point series. Welcome, Kent. How are you, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So I'm super excited to talk to you. You are the first poet on my podcast, and I would love to learn more about your journey. I've read a couple of your works. You released 3 books, 2016, 2017, and now was the latest one this year, or was it last year?
No, it was this year. It came out October 28th of this year.
Oh, yeah. So you are in New Hampshire, right?
Yep. Born and raised. I've been a couple other places, and I don't really like it anywhere else. I'm very happy here.
Well, it's a beautiful place, I hear, and I'm sure it inspired you to a lot of just reading your work, which is an insight into some of your life, and you describing nostalgic landscapes and towns and things that kind of remind you of events in your life and kind of inspiring. So I kind of have a romanticized view of New Hampshire, where book authors hide and create their masterpieces.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing, is hiding. I live in a little town. There's like 2,500 people in this town. It has one yellow flashing light, and it's absolutely perfect. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's everything that my wife and I wanted when we were looking for homes. So we're very happy to find an old house that was built in 1850. So all the floors creak in just the right places, and one bedroom is kind of tilted to the side, which is a little weird, but it's just perfect.
I think, in fact, one of your either stories or poems was talking about squeaking floors, and I remember that because it was a very catchy line that I loved. It was just so memorable. It's like the floor squeaks in all the right places, and that was perfect.
Yeah, there's something about old houses that you don't get that in new homes. You don't even get that in homes that are like, maybe 20, 30 years old. You don't get that. But walking upstairs, and especially if you're trying to be quiet at night, walking upstairs, you don't wake anybody up. The stairs that you have to skip, and then there's some that you just can't help but hit that stair, and it squeaks just perfectly, and it kind of sounds to me like history. Right. Because that stair's probably been squeaking that same way for 200 years. It's the square-headed nails that, don't really hold anything in place, but it's been squeaking that way forever. So, there's generations of people have been walking up those stairs and have been squeaking that stair the same exact way. And I might be thinking too much into it, but that's what I think of every time any place I go and the stair squeak or a floor squeaks. It's been squeaking like that forever. And I love that no one fixes it, because it's probably unfixable.
I think we find inspirational, and I don't know how it is, with you, but I think we find inspiration in all weird places, or like unexpected places, maybe is a better term, where you're just like carrying on with your life, and then suddenly something comes to you, and then you're like, wow, okay, well, that's something that I just noticed, right? And a lot of people, I think, nowadays just kind of carry through the life, just not noticing these tiny little things that can affect them. They just kind of like have a moving forward vision, and it just occupies them, and they don't see these minute details. And so when poets and book authors like yourself bring that to our attention, we, those who read things like that, take a moment, take a stock, and they're like, wow, okay, yeah, I should notice those things. So tell me more about when did you get into poetry? Tell me a little bit more about yourself. How did you get into it? And I want to learn more about you.
I think I was an incredibly introverted kid growing up, and I think once you get certain teachers, especially like in the 80s and 90s, when they met a really introverted kid, said, why don't you write poetry and maybe you'll come out of your shell? And then I started writing poetry, and they definitely didn't like what I was writing, because it was the stuff I was churning out, even in high school, was super dark. Of course, you get the whole teenager angsty kind of thing, but I think a couple of them kind of went, a little too far, and I got a lot of, do you need help? Do you want to talk to someone? I'm like, no, I'm fine. But I kind of even back then, used poetry as a way to purge. I had a rough day, and then I'd write a completely apocalyptic poem, but it wasn't, I didn't actually feel that way. It was kind of like turning the volume up to 11, getting it all out, and then I feel better, instead of raging or screaming or that kind of thing. And I didn't have, during high school, I wasn't a drinker. I didn't party. I was boring. I didn't really do all the things that, when grown-ups say, oh yeah, I do these massive parties when I was a teenager and got arrested. No, I didn't do any of that whatsoever. It was super boring, but I was able to get a lot of, angsty kind of teenager stuff out in poetry and writing.
And we'll talk about some of your, especially the latest book. And I read, I'd say good half of it, and it was really dark, and I was like, wow, I was really intrigued, because when I chatted with you, and I was like, wow, you're just such a mellow guy, and I'm like, I was like super intrigued, is like some of those poems, like, wow, that's really dark, and I was like, I definitely want to find out, is it like cathartic, is it catharsis, that purification that happens through that work, and you just kind of release it, let it go out, and doesn't affect you, and that's why you're so mellow.
Yeah, a lot of it, the poems in the third book, where we all went south, were complete, like, I have to get this out. And usually at the time, a lot of these poems are pretty old, 10, 15 years old, and I've just put them into this collection. And they were ways to get out this awful feeling I had inside, almost like this like ball of tar sitting inside, where I had to get it out. And at the time, I had no one to talk to. So if I put it on paper, then it was out of my system, out of my consciousness. There, it's a glob of goo on the paper, and I don't have to look at it anymore. But the other side of it is a lot of people that deal with anxiety and depression, like I do, are really good actors. So, like, I look pretty happy and I'm okay, but inside I'm totally panicking about talking to you. I don't know why, but this is what I do.
Well, I'm only a couple thousand miles away, and I won't bite over the internet. Right?
You can't reach me through the computer. I should be all set.
No, and this is like before we started this recording, it's a conversation. It's just like talking to an old friend, and just kind of reminiscing some of the things, and that's how kind of how I want to do this podcast, and where I just have conversations with interesting people, and I've been lucky to have super interesting people so far, and. Nice. And I'm so happy to have you on the show, because I'm so open to bringing in people from a variety of sources. So I talked to a psychologist about implicit memories. I'm talking to a chiropractor about holistic health, and I talked to a book author about her experience in Saigon in Vietnam. I talked to someone who publishes books for kids. So like variety of different people, and then so you fit into the the collage of the audience. Like everything's something interesting for everyone. Being a poet, a book author, and especially, like, it was very intriguing to me when I read some of your work, which was like super dark, and I wanted to find out what made you write that. Was it a coping mechanism where you kind of like got it out of your system? And first of all, how did you get into poetry? Like, was it something that was just natural to you? Because, like you said, like you were introverted, and so was I was as well introverted. I guess my recent test, a disc, or one of those that personality tests, they're like, oh yeah, you're extroverted. I'm like, well, that's something new, because I definitely would not describe myself as an extrovert, but now I seem to be drawing energy from others. And but enough about me. Ken, tell me how you got into poetry, and how was it difficult? And I'd love to kind of learn about the process.
I took a couple you have to do some creative writing classes in high school. And then I actually went to college and earned a degree in English and writing. And I was only able to get into one poetry class, unfortunately. But my professor there, he told me he liked my stuff and started pushing me towards the beat poets, Ginsberg and Kerouac and William S. Burroughs. And, he started pushing me that direction, which I totally went nuts for. That the idea of the rule breaking within literature kind of blew my mind. So you're making this, you can make this epic statement, but you can swear all you want. And the idea of that really kind of turned me on. But I really wasn't, even when I started college, I really wasn't writing for myself. I was trying to emulate poets that I'd read before, and great poets like Byron. Like, I don't know why anyone would even try to keep shooting for that. So it wasn't until I think my junior year where I started, all right, I'm not going to write for anybody else. I'm not going to write what people want to hear. I'm just going to start writing for me. And that's when I really started using poetry as a catharsis and getting, gooey feelings out. But I also started working with complete stream of consciousness. I maybe would be walking somewhere and I have this one line in my head. So go home, write that one line, and then try not to let the pen leave the paper and try to, build off that one line and just see what my brain had to say instead of, getting in the way. Well, is this what, Edgar Allan Poe, would he write this? I mean, does this really hold up to his standards? No, the hell with it. I'm going to write what I want. No one's going to read this anyway. The hell with it. It's not like, years down the line, I'm going to go crazy and start self-publishing my work. No, who would do that? There's no such thing as the internet. So the hell with it. I'm just going to start doing it. And then all of a sudden I've got all these books and I'm like, oh, okay. I've got all these poems and, stacks of notebooks. What am I going to do? And then I started seeing more and more authors self-publishing. I'm like, okay, well, all right, I'll think about this because this is my process. I'm gonna come up with this idea. Okay, so I'm gonna think about it and start analyzing it and weigh the pros and cons. So 8-9 years later, when I finally got the gumption to do it, I put together my first book, which was The Great North Woods. Growing up, my family would vacation along this river in northern New Hampshire, and it was in this area called the 13 Mile Woods, and I love it to this day. There's nothing really there as one little town, but you sleep right on the river. And there's actually a poem in my first book where I could always felt like laying in my tent next to that river, I could actually feel the power of the river through the earth. And I could never explain it. And, really deep kid, when I was like, 10 years old, like I could feel the river and like, yeah, okay. But, I'm
just going to interrupt you just to since we're on the Great North Woods, my favorite poem out of that was A Willow Tree by the River. And there was just something that you, I think, tapped in there where it evoked this nostalgic feeling about being in a place familiar and in a place that takes you inside of your mind into places. And that's how I kind of fell through that poem. So I wrote it down. I was like, I really like that poem. Was that one of the first poems in it, or was it? That
one actually is kind of recent, but in the same spirit of invoking a memory of a place. I mean, really, those poems in those first book, I swear that they're more for me than I think that anything else I've ever written. They're almost in a way more personal than the super dark stuff in the new book, in that most of those are pulled right from my childhood or even later experiences in my 20s and 30s where we go up into that area. And I tried to go up there as much as possible, just not only for the beauty of the place, but even the memories it evokes. We used to tube down the rapids in the river, and I remember it being wonderful and terrifying at the same time. It was up in there, was in my friend's van that I heard Metallica for the first time. And every time I hear that particular song, it brings me right back to being a little kid in that van on our way to go and tube. I remember the ice cream for it. I remember the old guy that kept the campsite kept a pair of boots sticking out from under the cabin, and he'd always tell us that was his assistant that the cabin dropped on, goofy stuff like that. So a lot of those poems, I actually have it here. Most of them, even if they're not,
would you mind would you mind finding that that poem and reading it to us, just to give the audience a sample of your work?
Yeah, I actually turned right to it, so that works out well.
Perfect.
So, a willow tree by the river. I'm thinking about a willow tree, the one by the river. Thin branches turn in the breeze. Do you remember drifting below it? A cool summer day, no clouds, and autumn in the air. I watched your fingertips tracing lines on the water surface. A perfect little moment, a treasured memory, a little something that brings me peace. So that was actually a paddle trip with my wife, and we like to kayak, and I was kind of drifting near her, and we were cruising under that willow tree and watching her. She had her paddle just laying across the boat and her fingertips touching the water just super gently. I mean, I don't know how more I could have found that more inspiring, but yeah, if I remember right, it was, it's hard to bring a pen and paper when you're kayaking. So we're trying to repeat it over and over in my head the entire time. So I actually don't remember anything the rest of the paddle until we got home, and I rushed to the car and just jotted it down real quick. So yeah, I was super distracted and probably pretty boring for the rest of that trip, because I was trying to repeat those lines over in my head so I wouldn't forget them. So, but I found a waterproof notebook, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Yep, I'm ready.
The poem is really great. It's very visceral. It gives you that feeling of being there, and I think the sense of the visuals and the touch, touching water, all of that just kind of brings in at least some memories in my life, and so I really connected with that one right away. I mean, it was like, wow, we got to talk about that. So, do you find, like, when you publish something and then you have conversations with people that read your work? I know you mentioned that you started writing initially to emulate other great authors and poets, but then at some point you said, like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to do this for myself. This is just me. What was the pivotal point that made you switch to that? Or, like, was it like, do you think it was just like you grew into it, like, hey, I'm really, this is a tool for myself, and I'll share it with others maybe at some point? Or was it a different was it something else that kind of made you switch from, like, hey, I don't care about, I'm writing this, for myself?
I think it was a lot of, I think I can probably credit one of my professors at college. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but as part of the English department in college, we had to do English department readings. So every part of the English major had to read in front of the entire department. That includes all the professors. And he's the same one who had been coaching me towards the beat poets. And he introduced everyone. And when it came to my turn, he got up to the podium and said, I'd like to introduce the bastard son of Jack Kerouac, Kent McKenzie. And I was just horrified, because where he was kind of, maybe, one of the young professors, the rest of the English department were 60s, 70s, these guys and women that have been teaching there since Christ was a carpenter. And I was just horrified. And he also talked me into reading one of my poems that had a lot of swearing in it. And he promised me, he goes, read this poem, and it's better to get a reaction than nothing else out of the department heads. I'm like, okay, but you're going to stick up for me when I try, they're going to suspend me. So I read this poem and I finished it, and I looked out, and he's got this giant Cheshire grin on his face, and the old department heads in the back were horrified. I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I like. This, if I'm going to horrify some old people, then okay, because that means I'm breaking a boundary that they didn't want me to break. And that was endlessly fascinating. So then it was just diving in, how awful can I make this, or how beautiful can I make this, but how visceral, how, can I invoke some feeling? And if I can feel it in me, then hopefully then I can bring that out in others. And I've had a couple people read them. There's a poem in the new book called Killing for Fun that a lot of people have just said that, they've given him chills. They've, had to take Xanax after reading it. They're, they're not sure they want to read that one again.
Yeah, it's a tough time to. I'd say it's very bold, given times right now and all the school shootings and that's pretty bold.
Well, that one particular poem is more like it's called Killing for Fun, but it's about your partner basically taking out all their frustration and anger on you and just beating you to a pulp every night and basically just slaughtering your self-esteem so they'll feel better. That's what that poem's about, and yeah, it's got an unfortunate title, but
I was going to thank you for clarifying now. So now who will pick up your book will not have that in the back.
No.
Oh, my goodness.
No. I honestly try to stay out of the political, and I try to stay out of the current. Both worlds are horrifying, and where I want to, invoke some kind of emotion, those are not the emotions I'm shooting for. A lot of the stuff is that I write about, or topics are more of the, I hate this term, but the humanity's universal truths, that kind of thing, life, love, death, that kind of thing. Not to get into the political or the
that often gets distracting. In your latest book, this one over here, where it all went south. Reading some of the material in it, I couldn't help but think that it was very therapeutic for, must have been like very therapeutic to get some of that stuff out. Now, it's catharsis, it's that purification process, right? And and that's something that people have to keep in mind. It's not to take things, especially in poetry, I should think. That it's layered work. Poetry is one of those. That's the way I take it. Poetry is one of those mechanisms that allows you to convey some things that sometimes are not even possible to convey. Things that you cannot describe. And tell us a little bit more about the. It's not only the poetry in that book, but also the artwork that you had. I think was it Ian who did some
Ian DeWitt.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because we'll provide a link to your website, so because there's some of those pictures over there and artwork, and they are some of them are very jarring. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the first book not so much, but the second one that I did, I included pictures in, and then I went full hog on the third one. Not only did I add pictures, but if you pick up the book and you look real close, there is a letter or a group of letters or a word that is mildly askew in every single poem. And it was this one I wanted to be not only with the poetry, but I wanted it also visual too. And Ian and I had been friends for a super long time. He's a fantastic artist with that camera. And he was honestly the first name that I thought of when I thought, I'm not really sure that I could handle the pictures for these poetry, but right away knew that Ian could. I contacted him and told him my idea, doing a photo for each of the poems. He was super into it. I sent him the whole book, because the reality is this book has been done for close to 3 years, even though it just came out a couple months ago, but it's been done. And so I sent the whole thing down to Ian, because he lives in, I believe he lives in North Carolina or South Carolina. I think it's South Carolina. And he went to work, taking each poem. And I love that he didn't say, well, what do you want for this poem? What kind of photo? He just said, he did, he goes, I'm not really sure of this one or that one. I'm like, no, do what I want, your interpretation of each of these, and some of them are just, he goes, okay, here's the photo for this poem, and I opened up the file. I'm like, oh my God, it's terrifying, it's horrible, it's disturbing, it's perfect. So
exactly, I was going to say they complemented perfectly, as disturbing as some of them are, and very memorable. It's like one of those almost like iconic pictures that will just stay with you. That alone is just it's an artwork, and it's definitely complementing your work.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I was going with this third book. I mean, to be honest, this third book was the reason I started doing this series. It was going to be a 4-book series, and I knew that from the start. But this one was the one I was headed for when I published the first one. The one that I really wanted to get out. And oddly enough, it's been the book that's been, I swear it's cursed. Like I said, it's been done. It's been done for years, but like it only just came out now, and it's honestly it's still not perfect. But
because it took so long, is that what you think?
Yeah, there was delays and formatting. I somehow lost control of being able to format where the pictures were and how the poem sat. So I went to my friend Mike Kulak, and he lives down in Massachusetts, which I'm not good driving in Massachusetts. I'm really, really bad at driving in Massachusetts. The rule is in Massachusetts where you just you put your foot down and kind of squint your eyes and hope for the best that everybody's going to get out of your way. And
you should try New Jersey.
I've been to Jersey once, and that was enough. But I drove down to his house, spent the weekend down there with the book, and we worked on it the whole time, ate a massive amount of Chinese food, and when I came back, I'm like, it's perfect. And then I went to look at it again, and somehow it was all messed up all over again. And then I'm emailing him back and forth because I love him dearly, but I am not driving down there twice. But then it just kept mysteriously getting messed up. The formatting, the pictures are on the wrong pages, the size is wrong. How is this happening? And at one point, I'm like, this is a sign. I'm done. I'm not publishing this book. There's no way. I can't do this. And then reading some of the poems in there, I'm like, I shouldn't tell the world these things. These are incredibly personal. No one should know these things about me. So there was a moment. It was like a month and a half where I was like, I'm done. I'm completely done. This book has kicked my ass. I'm not doing this anymore. No one's going to miss me. This is fine. And then this little voice in my head.
Yeah, what brought you
back? It was the idea of giving up ticks me off. It really does. It bothers me. It bothers me a lot of giving up on something. I mean, writing poetry is something that's so now ingrained in me. The idea of stopping now is, I don't know, it feels wrong. It really does. It feels super wrong. And then the idea that I released book 1 and 2 of a 4-part series, I think that would, I don't have a lot of OCD, but I have just enough where I think that would eat at me. So no, I'm going to do it. And then I happened to get in contact with a friend from high school that now runs an indie publishing company called Crazy Ink. And I said, the books that they usually publish are not poetry. They do a lot of fantasy novels and that kind of thing. Well, I'm like, well, I'll give it a shot. And so I email her, and what do you think? And I get back and almost immediately, these are fantastic. Absolutely. We will sign you. I'm like, oh, holy crap. So I'm like, all right, now okay, I'm going to go forward. This is going to be no problem. They are a publishing company. They can figure out this formatting. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen. It took 4 of their formatters 2 months to try to figure out this book because it's completely cursed. I'm positive it has a soul of its own, and it's nasty. It's a jerk. But the day it came out, I'm like, okay, I don't care anymore. Finally, it's out. The next book, I swear to God, is going to have no collaborators. It's not going to have any pictures. It's just going to be words. I cannot wait for something super easy now. And then maybe we'll think about putting the whole thing together in one volume, all 4 books. But I don't know.
So one of the things that I ask book authors is, how was their experience with publishing a book? And some of them self-publish, some of them go through publishers, and for those who will be listening to this podcast and budding authors, poets, what is your message to them, given that you've been through ups and downs in publishing and formatting, and it's a leap, right, between creating a poem which stands on its own and then packaging it into a book that then has to be released, right? So vastly two different things. It's kind of like a movie where you have, here's a script. Oh, wow, it's beautiful and it's everything. Here we shot all this raw footage and now we have to edit this into a beautiful work of art, right?
Right, down to 90 minutes.
Exactly. So how was that experience? Like, I mean, you kind of described some of it right now. Was it the same with all three books, or?
Yeah, I mean, the first two were super easy because I only had myself to yell at me for not making a deadline. But even working with Crazy Ink was incredibly easy. Despite the trouble with the formatting, they were fantastic. They were super supportive, and all their authors support each other. So there was a lot of they call it pimping on multiple websites. Posting the book on release dates and that kind of thing, and everybody kind of helps each other out, and it's a fantastic community of authors and creators. I was absolutely thrilled to be involved with them, and it's ongoing support too. It's basically whatever you need, and they've got multiple points of contact, so you don't just have one person. If one person can't talk to you, then they post, okay, you can contact this person for these hours, any questions you have, day or night, and they're there. I don't know when the people sleep. It's I'll be up late at night just thinking, I have this question, I'll email them real quick, and then 2 minutes later, bing, my phone goes off. I'm like, you freaking kidding me? It's 2 a.m. It's not right. Right. And I think that's what separates like a large publishing house to a tiny little indie one. They value their writers in a way that I don't think larger companies just have the capacity to do. I don't think it's not that they don't want to. I think it's probably just because of the sheer numbers that they have to deal with, as opposed to a small indie one that's only got maybe 100, 150 writers, as opposed to a giant giant publishing company.
Spot, but are you going to publish with them again?
I believe so. I'm still putting the finishing touches on book 4. So
tell me a little bit more about book 4.
Book 4 is so it's each of the books has been a point on the compass. So the first book was The Great North Woods, so that was obviously north. The next book was The Noreaster Outside the Harbor. That was east, which from my location is set in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is right on the coast, which is in east. Where it went south, obviously, is where everything went to hell. So the next book, I haven't really decided on a title yet, so I can't give you that. But basically, it's poetry involving my wife and I moving out to the western part of New Hampshire, finding our house, and this area is, aside from power lines and our one flashing light, is honestly not changed a lot since the time of horse and buggy, and I absolutely love that. The colonial era of New England is something I'm completely fascinated with and have been forever. So a lot of the poetry in that book is not only our move out to the west and getting away from heavily suburban areas. I know most people will think of New Hampshire and not really think of heavily suburban areas, but we have them. Getting away from all that, the traffic, the noise, the chaos. Where we used to live was not far from the fire station, and they went out on average, I think, every 22 minutes. And as soon as those doors opened, the sirens would start. And when we found this house, we were kind of heartbroken to see that the fire station is actually right across the street. But here, we're like, oh my God, there's the fire station. We're never going to find a house without a fire station across the street. But here, they don't use the sirens until they get into town. and that's only if they have to. So it's like the greatest thing ever. The only time we hear a siren is this is adorable. During the summer months, every other Sunday, they invite all the little kids over to touch a truck, and they let the kids, and they do the siren for the little kids. So it's not even annoying. It's super adorable.
Well, maybe it's going to be inspiring for one of your poems. I mean, it's you can turn that around, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a lot of it's kind of almost a full circle where the fourth book is going to be dealing a lot less with, I don't want to say industrial areas, but like the second book is basically in the city of Portsmouth, and then the next book, the third, is all dark and broody, where the fourth one is a lot back into nature. There's a poem in there called The White Book, which is, I hadn't even heard the term till we moved out here, which was basically walking out into a snow-covered field and looking at animal tracks, and that is the White Book. There's tracks of a marten, there's tracks of you can see the bird wings in the snow where it landed and that kind of thing, and see tracks of fisher cats and that kind of thing. So the idea of having the White Book in my backyard is just fantastic. So a lot of the poems deal with that, and colonial eras. There's some towns that some of in this area where the houses were built before we were the United States. So I'm fascinated by the old houses that, if you see especially in this area, their chimneys painted white with a black ring at the top. That was a sign for people that were loyal to the crown that house was safe to be in. Safe for the loyals, for Tories to go in and still be loyal to the king and not get all attacked by all these weird patriots that were suddenly running around. So
we want our own country. Go away.
Yeah.
Ask you. So the first book in 2016, The Great North Woods. Then 2017, Noreaster Outside the Harbor, and right now, Where It All Went South. The third book, the third installment. I found that they have different. One is poetry. One you had like a short stories. What is the fourth book? What is it going to be like? Is it going to be poems? Is it going to be stories?
Yeah, it'll be straight poems. It's I suppose a little weird that the second book is these micro short stories, but they were a way too of where the third book was kind of like purging the horrible goo inside you. I wish I had a better term than goo, but that's all I got. The second book was escapism, was pure escapism. I love being in a town. People watching is most people love people watching, but seeing a conversation from across the street where you can't actually hear what they're saying, but you can kind of look at their body language and like, okay, one of them isn't really happy with the other. It was kind of escapism to write that story. But then I focused on, in that book, there are no names. There's basically he and she, but there's no names, there's no descriptions. So that was a way, it was almost like a blank canvas where anybody could put anything they wanted into it, and there's a lot of stories in that one about kind of instant love and love at first sight and that kind of thing. And there's some painful ones too. And I tried to make it as rounded as possible. But yeah, that book was stories that I would kind of tell myself every night before going to sleep, especially after, bad days or that kind of thing, was, the idea of meeting a lover on a corner, while there was certain, at one point there were a dozen bars in Portsmouth, and they all had this great music coming out of them. And I remember walking the streets at night, and you're getting glimpses of these bands playing, and the idea of meeting your lover at a time on that corner, and then going home arm in arm. And there doesn't have to be any grand meeting in it. It doesn't gotta have to be this earth-shattering, love to make Romeo and Juliet weep. But just simply being together, that simple emotion, I thought would connect with more people than just me. And that was the reason I was going to do just poetry, but I had so many of these jotted down. I'm like, I can actually do a whole chapbook out of these. This would be, super easy. And it was a little lazy on my part because I wanted to do a second book, and I had it already written. So it's just a matter of going and finding, little scraps of paper. I'm like, okay, here's one, and here's another, and okay, I'll put them all together. But I wanted to publish them. They were kind of old friends. And I thought they deserved to kind of be out on their own and have their own little life. So that if I really feel nostalgic, that's the one I'm reading.
Here's what you said from Noreaster outside the harbor. You said, "I think most people imagine interactions with others. When I first began to experiment with this type of writing, it was out of need to escape from somewhat dreary reality. In these short scenarios, I could craft a conversation, a relationship, or even a painful events just the way I needed them to be. In my own life, I felt helpless and just along for the ride. But in these, I built a world I could live in, even for just a short while." When I was reading them, I think first reaction was, there were like you said, no names to characters, so you couldn't sort of like build like the history for them and everything. It was just like a sliver of reality, a moment, and I was thinking like, wow, if someone could turn these into like really short, short independent, movies, not movies, but like shorts, like just
do the little skits of them.
Yeah, and the fewer words, the better, right? Because a lot of it would be just like acting things out and just conveying, just kind of like literally a poetry in motion, and that's kind of like how I visualized it, and I found them really fascinating. So yeah, good work.
Excellent, it worked.
Yeah, no, absolutely, no. So in the next book, you're going back to poetry and poems, correct?
Yep. It's I have probably one more round to edit it, to self-edit it. The nice thing about Crazy Ink is they're basically, I send them the work and great, okay, then if they're just going to publish it, there's no interference, which is fantastic. That was something I was initially really, really worried about is, okay, I'm going to submit, which is basically a giant sliver of my soul, to a publisher who doesn't know me, and they're going to say, well, we're going to cut this one, we're going to move this one here, and we don't like this sentence here. What? No. No one gets that right but me. It sounds super selfish, but no, this is my art. It might be just words. My wife is a painter, and I'd love to be able to paint, but this is the only art I have. And no one gets to mess with it. And the great thing about Crazy Ink is they have no intention. This is what this is what I'm passionate about. Then that's what's getting published. So,
excellent.
So yeah, that's the next book is, I'm not sure when it's going to be out. I'm still talking to Crazy Ink when their schedule is going to be. They're an indie publisher, so it's not like they can churn out 10,000 books a month, but soon.
So for those who are listening to this podcast and getting inspired by some of your work, what are some of the advices that you could, share with other, book authors and poets as you went through your own life and struggles and going on this journey and discovering this and, shifting from trying to emulate someone to doing your own art and to hell with it all. This is just my work. I own it. I love it. It's from me. I'll share it so others can benefit maybe from it or just explore it, live through it. What are some of your advices that, for starting poets and book authors?
I read a quote once, and I'm not sure who had said it, but the quote was basically, "You're not going to write the next great American novel. Just shut up, sit down, and write." And that is incredibly freeing. Yes, I am not going to be bumping Hemingway off that shelf. It's not going to happen. And it's incredibly freeing. Yeah. And that's what the point I had to reach. I am not going to be, no one's going to say, oh my God, he's just like Lord Byron. Oh my God, he's listed among the top. It's not going to happen. And it's incredibly freeing, just because you're not going to be listed among the greatest author on the planet for the entire history of the world doesn't mean that you can't write. Write down what you feel. And if you felt it, then it's absolutely genuine. And if the more genuine you are, the more people I think are going to relate to that. If you're trying to write for someone else, and I started falling into it when I started, writing these books. I'm like, oh, okay, the fourth book is coming. I have to write another poem about this, or this. And then all of a sudden the work just ground to a halt, because now I'm writing for a book and not writing for me. As soon as I got back into hell with it, I'm just going to write whatever I want to freaking write. That's when the work really started flowing. That's when, boom, the fourth book was done. Boom, honestly, the fifth book is almost done now, where the fifth book is going to be a lot of stream of consciousness poetry, a lot of super weird, nothing like I've done before. Because, like I said, I was writing for these books. Now I'm just going to be writing for me, which I'll put into a book, instead of trying to fit a theme that I imposed on myself. And not only, I think you get a lot of writers I want to be like my favorite writer. I want to be, my favorite novelist, my favorite poet. I want to be like my favorite screenwriter. So all of a sudden the writing you're doing sounds just like your favorite whatever. I don't think it's easy to find your own voice. The quote in my first book by Allen Ginsberg was, if you want to find your own voice, forget about having it heard. And that's why I put that in that first book, because that's absolutely what I did. I published that book for me. I didn't think I would sell. Well, I thought I'd sell a couple, because, I'd guilt trip a couple of friends and family members into buying one just so I could feel important. But I honestly didn't think it'd be a bestseller, and it isn't. But it's completely irrelevant. If I sold one book or I sold 1 million, I still wrote it for me. And same with the rest of the books, that they're completely for me. If you're writing for someone else, you're not writing. I think you're just it's almost dictating. So yeah.
I'm so glad that you said that. Because I think there's a lot of parallels between that and producing any kind of content. And so the advice when I was sharing with my friends, hey, I'm going to start a podcast, and they're like, what? You? What? It was such a huge disconnect. But then once they came to terms, they said, I said, like, well, what do you think about it? And they said, just be authentic, be you. Don't try to put a facade. Don't try to be someone. Just be yourself. And A, it just comes natural. B, you don't care because you're just, look, we're just having a conversation over here, and hopefully whoever's going to be watching this is going to get something out of it. And it's this kind of long format conversation that I think is resonating with a lot of people these days, because access to media, to content is super cheap or free nowadays. So it's going to be a matter of picking and finding that niche. Like, what is it that I need in my life right now? Do I want to hear conversation with a poet and his journey, and what can I get out of that? Instead of like, oh yeah, let me give you 7 steps to something, and then those kinds of books where you have kind of prescriptive design. And I'm super glad that you are writing for yourself and sharing that, and it's easier and easier to do that nowadays. You can get self-published, or you can even read it and publish it on YouTube or what have you. But I think the key to that is what you said, which is write for yourself. And then I would add on, you had a little bit of self-deprecating statement over there, like, well, you're not going to be the greatest author in the world. But you know what? Who knows? Maybe because you had that freedom, right? Maybe you had that because you didn't have that burden of like, oh yeah, I'm going to be like Hemingway or Shakespeare or the greats.
Right.
But who knows what's going to inspire you and what you're going to produce, and maybe something is going to just click so much that's going to go viral and people will love it. So I think that approach and that perspective is dispersing that box in which you could put yourself easily.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of, I like to think that I'm completely not done as far as how I write. It's going to evolve, because as a human being, I'm going to evolve. Different experiences are going to change the way my outlook. They're going to change the way I live. Friends coming in and out of your life change the way you react to certain things, and your writing will affect that. I think my writing will affect that. My writing has definitely changed over the years, and it's kind of exciting to think where my writing is going to be in 5 years. Where is it going to be in 10 years? Where is it going to be in 15 years? I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the idea is to, if it starts changing, to not go, well, I can't write like that. I've never written like that before. No, the hell with it. Go. Don't just dabble. The hell with it. Jump in feet first. Do something weird. If you hate it, no one ever has to see it, but put it down on paper, and then look back at it and go, okay, that's really weird and mildly disturbing, or, but maybe that's your next logical step. I think that would go for just about anybody. Go for writers, go for photographers, go for especially musicians. I didn't mention this, but I've been playing drums for 30 years, and most of the people my age only want to play the ZZ Top and AC/DC, where I want to do weird, like Frank Zappa, progressive. Oh my God, what did I just hear? That's the stuff that I really want to play. And unfortunately, I can't find anybody my age that wants to do that, because all they want to play is ZZ Top. So unfortunately, all my drums have just been sitting stacked for a while. And when we moved to this area, it's filled with all these incredible artists, photographers and painters, and all these incredible people, but there's not a single damn musician in my area within like 50 freaking miles. So
you got to get on Facebook and start a group. Maybe someone.
Yeah. Yeah. The downside of that is that people my age, like I said, want to play AC/DC, or they're all alcoholics. None of which I'm really into. So I've been instead of playing music, I've just been writing, and that's been it's been taking up my time.
Speaking of writing, how do you approach your craft? Do you take it as I'll write it as it comes, inspirational, or do you treat it more of a everyday, more structured? Every day I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to process what I've heard, what inspired me, and write some words down so it's more consistent. How do you approach your craft?
I don't. The idea of sitting down and writing every day seems. Also, if I'm not inspired, it's not going to happen. But it's more often than not, I've thought of a line, a couple lines, a particular word that I've written down. I've got these little scraps of paper that I keep around me, and I've got these stacks of folded piece of papers with 3 or 4 lines on them, where I'm like, okay, well, I can take this part of this one, I took part of this one, or, and then, I'll go on my phone and like, well, I've got this line I wrote down, standing in the grocery store at the deli counter, waiting for the incredibly slow employees to give me my ham. And I wrote a line there, or, 2 lines there, or I wrote half a poem at a wedding that was a weird experience, but little lines there, and then it's I know I've got these, they're all sitting in the back of my head. Then it's sitting down at my desk and going, okay, I've got these ideas here. Do they all blend together? And the terrifying thing is, a lot of the times I've got all these little scraps of paper. I'm like, oh my God, these are all kind of on the same idea. So apparently I was trying to process something in my head, and I've come across where I've got dozens of lines, but they've all kind of fit together. So then I've fought the urge to say, well, I'm just going to take all these lines and I'll put them together, and bam, I've got a poem, and then I can move on. So what I'll do is I'll look at them all and then start writing again. And not really like, well, what did I write here? Okay, I could put this here and put that there. So I'll look at everything, read it through, and then I know the theme that I was going for. Then that ends up being a whole poem, which can be super satisfying. I'm like, I almost wrote this unconsciously. The downside is that I've just taken a stack that's like 3 weeks worth of stuff that's written. I've just done a single poem. Now I got to start all over again, which is kind of a bummer. Like I put all this work and 3 weeks into it, and then I got crap. Okay, I've got one poem that's already down, and now I'm done, and I got to start all over again. And God, whose idea was this? But it's still super fulfilling, and I think when that gets down to it, no matter what your art is, if you're not being fulfilled by it, if you don't say, oh, I really want to write, or I really want to take my camera out, or I really, really want to paint today. If you're not doing any of those things, it's almost pointless. If you're doing it, I have to, I guess I have to write, or I have to paint, or, this is expected of me now.
It's not fun when it becomes a job, right? No,
or for me, it's not fun when I'm expected to do it. I have this massive problem with authority, including if that authority is my own. So if I'm expecting myself to do it, I'll find any excuse to get out of it. Right. I mean, there's months where honestly, I don't write. I try, but if I'm not feeling inspired, or if I'm just like super pushing myself, I have to start churning out some work. I really have to start churning out this work. I really want to go and play that new video game. So that's what I'm going to do. Because screw you. I'm not going to work.
What are the tricks? What are the tricks and tips that you how do you trick yourself into finishing something? A lot of people just procrastinate with things, and so it sounds like you're like, hey, I'm going to reward myself with something if I complete something. But it also sounds like you are creating things based on inspiration rather than a structured, like, hey, I'm a book author of some kind of a novel which has a story, which has a plot, which has these key points that have to be hit, and poetry is different, isn't it? Right? It
is, because I can encapsulate one thing in one poem and then be done with it. Or if it's a theme that I kind of like, I can run with it. I can write multiple parts of one poem. I can work on an epic if I wanted to, or I could have a single thought that I want to get down that I could get out in 3 lines. And the nice thing about poetry is as far as I'm concerned, there's no rules. Anybody that, you can't do this. You can't do this with poetry. You can't do that. You can't, it has to be a number of lines or it doesn't count as bleh.
Right.
Now, who gives a shit?
More, right? Sometimes with poetry, less is more.
Yeah. If you feel those 3 lines and that's it, boom. Stop. Because if you're pushing yourself, if you push yourself, all right, those 3 lines are perfect. Now, I can't just leave these 3 lines. I got to push something else. Now it's just garbage after it. Sure, you might find some inspiration and it might turn out okay. It has never worked like that for me. If I've written those 3 lines and I feel that that's the end of it, that's the end of it. I never try to push myself more into pushing myself into something that I think might be more grand, might be more, super relatable, trying to be Lord Byron, that idea, that super pushes me. I am not going to be Lord Byron. None of my work is going to be held up to that kind of standard. And I don't give a damn anymore. If people like my work, I'm absolutely thrilled. If they don't like it, well, that's probably the case. It's totally fine, because my stuff is, for the most part, super personal. But I keep being told that we all have these same problems, which is kind of depressing, that we all have these same problems. But the idea of having that universal, I hate saying this, the universal truth thing, it bothers the crap out of me. I think there's a couple of universal truths for human beings, and I think there's personal truths. The idea of someone out there searching for truth. Just
truth. No. How do you mean the ultimate truth, or what do you mean by that?
The truths in the way I see it is your mortality and what you're going to do with it. You are born, you're going to die, and what you do in between point A and point B, that is the truth you should be looking for. And in that journey between point A and point B, that is the truth that you should be looking for. But it's that truth that means something to you. You know, the idea that I really, really like silence. And that's one of my universal truths, is not going to be a universal truth for many, many people. You know, some people like, you know, the idea of standing in the middle of Times Square 24 hours a day. You know, that is their truth. That is what they love. I've been to New York once. Yeah, right.
That'll be a great poem.
I should start writing this down. You and I can start. We'll collaborate and well do a book together. I like that idea.
We can rewatch this podcast and you know.
Yeah, there you go.
But no, there's something to it. You know, the truth. Everybody's like, well, what is the meaning of life? And you know, all those grand questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually had a college course. I don't remember the poem. It was basically the poem was an old man sitting on his porch, and he was kind of down, and the bird landed down, and then he was happy to see the bird, and then the bird flew away, and he was sad again. And I'm sitting in this college class, and the professor goes, okay, what does this poem mean? What did the poet mean? Which always bothered me. And all these hands go up from the rest of my classmates saying, well, it's about life and death. It's about the duality of man. It's about the fight between good and evil. And this class was at 8 a.m. I had slept for maybe an hour, and I lost it. I screamed out and just went, wait a minute! Couldn't it just be an old guy sitting on his porch and he was sad and the bird landed and then he was happy and then the bird took off and then he was sad again? Couldn't it be just that? And I had, a dozen different eyes looking at me like I'm high. And the professor kind of looks at me and goes, yeah, that could be it. I'm like, okay, just wanted to make sure I wasn't losing my fucking mind. So
dropping the mic, I'm out.
Yeah, the rest of the English department didn't really like me. The idea of saying, well, this is what that poet meant, or this is what that author meant. Unless you are that poet, you have no idea what that author meant, unless he specifically said, this is what I meant when I wrote this piece. If he didn't do that, you got no clue. And the idea of spending in a lifetime saying, well, this is what he actually meant. How the hell do you know? You can speculate, this is what I think he meant. And then that goes back to your truth. This is what this means to me. This becomes my truth. Mm-hmm. The idea of, finding a universal truth other than, life, death, and love seems ridiculous to me. And I've only come across that conclusion in the last couple of years.
Life, love, and death.
It's
the three pillars.
It's mildly depressing, but the love part's really nice. If you do it right, that love part is actually pretty cool. Personal, my wife and I have been married 13 years. We've never had a fight. We went on 3 dates and I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We were married 3 months later. Doing love right is actually kind of cool. And
no prescription. Going back to what you just said right now, when it always kind of tickled me when I took really very few classes in arts with a more of a technical background, but I was always kind of intrigued by how people were doing these courses on how to interpret somebody else's work, and instead of letting people interpret themselves and like, hey, this is what it means to me. It's not like what you said, like there's like no this universal truth, like, oh, this is what he meant and that's it, because I'm a professor and I know what I'm talking about, and that's the truth. Like leave it up to people, leave it up to consumers who consume this and figure out and what it means to them, what it means to their where they are in their life right now, and how is it affecting them is more important than having some kind of like, oh yeah, there you go, here's the analysis and that's what it means.
Yeah, how do you grade something? How do you grade someone on their reaction to a piece of art?
Right.
That the idea of that blows my mind. Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't react right to this piece of art. You didn't react correctly to this poem or to this story. How the hell do you know how I should react?
Right.
If I had any reaction at all, I think that is the important part. And then saying, well, you didn't interpret this incorrectly, which I got a couple times during my English courses. Well, you didn't interpret this properly. How the hell do you know how it should be interpreted? This is how it affected me, how, this this particular piece affected me. So how do you grade me on it? And not only did a lot of the people in the English department not like me, a lot of the professors didn't really like me either. The idea of swallowing something whole just because I was told I had to, just
it's the price tag of being an independent individual mind.
Yeah. I'm not going to just believe something because you're telling me to believe it. If you can give me empirical evidence, then okay, I'll take it. But do this because you have to, I don't like that.
So you've been doing this now for many years. Give me some.
Yeah, probably.
From your everything, like for new guys starting in this or doing this or considering, like, or people that are like, hey, I could never write poetry, that's just not me. Give me some thoughts on like how you your words of advice, what worked for you, some of your lessons learned from your own and this journey.
Honestly, I think my biggest one is there are no rules. Everything is changing. Art is changing. Literature is changing. Everything, cinema, journalism, politics, the way the world interacts with each other, changing at a phenomenal rate. So don't say, well, I can't do this. You can do it. It may not be a carbon copy of what's been done before, and that would be awesome. Creating something new. I used to hang around with a lot of people that created nothing. The idea of not creating anything just sounds so dull. But to create anything, and I mean anything, it doesn't have to be art, it doesn't have to be poetry. I mean, it could be sculpture, it could be taking a photo. I mean, we've all got these amazing cameras in our phones, and take a picture of that sunset and manipulate it to go crazy, but create something, and how rewarding that can be, especially if you do it twice or 3 or 4 times. And then you start getting a taste for it. What if you're creating not just a painting? What if you're cooking something, creating a new dish, taking something you like and changing it and making it your own. I mean, that goes with steel sculpture or making pottery. It goes with anything, but not only creating something, but trying to push something, creating new. And if you're creating it for the first time, that it's something new in the world, and how amazing is that? You've brought something into the world that didn't exist, and there was no way it was going to exist unless you made it.
Right.
Oh, it's an amazing feeling, and you get to like, wow, I really like this feeling. I'm going to do this again and again and again. And the cool thing is the more you start pursuing a passion like that, the less time you have for drugs and alcohol. And that's where the real savings come, because then all your money goes to that, and you've got no room for any of the bad stuff in your life. Then now you're inadvertently living healthy and creating art at the same time. Holy crap! What if we all did this? What a world this would be.
Right.
Because the galleries would be
fearless.
filled.
So what I'm hearing from you is be fearless, try things out, don't put yourself in a box, and don't give a damn what other people think, because you might be creating.
Don't give a damn.
Yeah, don't give a damn.
Don't give a damn. Just make the damn thing. That's, if I'm having a problem writing something, just write the damn thing. Just shut up and write the damn thing and get it. Not really get it over with, but get it out. It's done. I've got it down there on my desk. Okay, it's out. You were a little bitch through the whole thing, and I whined and cried, and I don't really like it, but the hell with it, it's out. Maybe I take 2 words out. Holy crap! Okay, I like this a little better, but still, I just brought something into the world that there's no way that could have been created by anybody else but me. I'm not saying it's the greatest thing ever, but I created something, and it's an incredible feeling. So if you're thinking about, well, I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to bring something out into this world and no one's going to like it, or, well, everybody's going to think this is stupid. And I went through that. I mean, I've got 400 poems sitting in notebooks that I have no intention of letting anyone see, but what is the harm? Yeah. Some jackass is going to say, well, this is garbage. Well, he thought it was garbage. Someone else might, it might be the key to opening up their entire world. And that spectrum of possibility is pretty exciting. So why not just do it? And you don't have to put it out. If you write something, you paint something, you create something, you don't have to tell the world about it. You can if you want. And that, again, not only does that, you've brought something new into the world, but that is yours. And you own that thing, and you can share it with the world, or you can keep it to yourself. And it's whatever you feel inside that will really dictate where that goes. So, create, characters that are just super weird. One of the universal things in writing is write what you know. And, for the most part, I've stuck to that, but I'm starting to think of, what if I start writing what I don't know? What if, it doesn't have to be super factual. I'm not going to start writing about, the siege of Troy, and it was actually not a giant horse. It was, a cat. I'm not going to start writing, this is what actually happened. But if I start, writing about, events that didn't actually happen, that I don't know anything about, that couldn't happen, why not? Yeah. There's no one stopping me, and there's no rules. I think that's what a lot of people, if you're just starting out, they have to get over, is the idea that, well, here's a set of rules and I can't break them. Well, who the hell made up those rules, and why are you following them? Screw it.
And if you do break them, and if you do break them, and then someone will applaud you for that, like, wow, how unorthodox, how brilliant, right?
Absolutely. They took all the rules and threw them out. That's fantastic. Go find a list of rules and break every one of them. It's not like the cops are coming to your house for breaking rules of literature. And the only ones you're going to piss off, that's not going to happen. and by breaking those rules, the only ones you're going to piss off is the old guard that did the same thing to their old guard by taking a next step. And you never know if the next step you're going to take is a step in the direction that actually leads the entire literature world into one direction. On one end of that spectrum, on the other hand, what if it frees you completely? And how amazing that one little step where I'm going to go this direction where I've never been before. Don't look around and say, well, has anybody else done this? Oh, screw it. Just go and do it. And that one step you take frees you and opens up this massive world for you to explore. Holy crap. And then there's nothing stopping you. And then, then you can make up all your own rules if you want to stick with a guideline for what you're going to create. And, and then you can follow those, or get halfway through and say, screw it, I'm going to break my own rules and piss myself off. And now I'm going to go in this other direction. Nothing stopping you from doing these things.
That alone would be worth the journey.
Yeah. Right. It's just the idea that around that next corner, that next piece of paper that you're going to pull out on your desk and start writing on could be the start of a journey that is going to absolutely blow your mind. That is going to change everything about you. Just the possibility of that is enough to keep someone writing. It's enough to keep me writing. I love it. The next step. I have no idea I might write something tomorrow that's, holy crap. Okay. I'm ditching everything. This is amazing. This is the new rhythm that I'm going to start writing to. Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac talked a lot about the new rhythms in their poetry, and they were influenced a lot by the jazz that was coming out in New York at that time, and totally avant-garde stuff. Where they were experimenting in new ways that no one had seen before, and they started matching their poetry to this new direction. And I think that's why it's still popular today, is because they took it in a new direction. So who's going to take it in that next direction? Who knows where it's going to be? That's incredibly exciting. And super nerdy at the same time, and it's fun to embrace them both. Those ideas.
I resonate with it. I think in part because I'm on that journey myself, and so I recognize where you're saying, and those words hit me, because it's a gateway to take you to a new place. And once you lose that attachment to those things that limit you, know, that box, you step outside of it, and you feel free, and that is worth the journey. And we put boundaries on ourselves. You know, those are artificial things that we're like, oh, I couldn't do that. But once you give the possibility a chance that, you know what, maybe it is possible that I could do it. I'm not saying that everyone can do everything, but I think you should explore. And the fear of, you know, that's what kids have. You know, I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, and I see how when she tries things, and she's fearless. I mean, she will try something at least once. And I'm like, wow, we as adults, we lose a lot of that, right? And then we just kind of live in these prescribed templates that society kind of has for us. And then those are our boundaries. So I'm looking forward to your next book. When is it? When is it going to be out?
I'm hoping in 2020. I'm hopefully mid 2020. It's all going to depend on what my publisher can handle. You know, it's they focus a lot on, you know, their ability to properly market something, you know, and where they're just tiny little company. I think they have all of like 3 or 4 employees. They have to budget their time as well. And you know, with the next book, I'm not in a super hurry, so I'm not going to push super hard to get it out. It's when it's available. It's available. It was this last one where it went south. I could not wait to get it published. I could not wait to basically get it out of my head and onto the page and get it out. That was the one I was focused on. For the 4th book, it's a lot lighter material. It's kind of back to nature, where I'm super happy, and settings in colonial towns and that kind of thing. And I mean, there's some personal things where there's some work in there where it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There's some, you know, stuff in there with, you know, not super dark like the last one, but maybe touches of gray.
You're completing a series, right? You're bringing everything back, and all 3 of your current books are, you know, different flavors and different styles, and I love that. And so I hope that your 4th book is kind of going to bring a closure to this Compass series.
It certainly will.
And and I'm looking forward to that. I would love to have another podcast when you're done with that book, and I'd love to talk about it and your journey between now and when you get it published.
Excellent. This has been a blast. Absolutely. I'd love to come back.
And in the meantime, where can people find more information about you and your books?
The best place is basically just to type my name into Amazon right now, Kent A. McKenzie, and it'll take you to my books. You can click on my name on the Amazon page and follow me as an author. I had a web page, but for the longest time, I was the only one racking up the hit counter. So I've contemplated putting it back up. Honestly, it will depend on if it ends up being worth it as far as the sales and books. If you know, money is obviously not infinite. Even, you know, as a poet, I have a day job, like most poets probably do. So,
right. An artist.
In a way, yes, very much so. But so I might have the page back up again. So basically, it's, you can follow my author page on Amazon, and obviously there's a Facebook page, poet Kent A. McKenzie. If you search for that, you'll find that page, and you can follow me there. And I post stuff every once in a while. I'll post a random poem up on there just for kicks. So
fantastic.
That's really it for social media.
Well, everyone, check out Kent's book. The latest one is Where It All Went South. It's a book number 3 in the Compass Point series. It has some dark poetry, stunning artwork, photography in it, and also the 2 previous books by Kent McKenzie. You can find that right now on Amazon. And Kent, it's been a pleasure. and we'll chat.
I had a great time.
And thank you for being on the podcast. Love it.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it. This was a great time.
Talk to you later. Bye now.